Welcome, everybody, to the HOJ-Cast, episode 22. This episode is going to have 3 segments in it. The first is, I'm titling it, The Antidote to a Bull Market. The second is the role of storytelling in collecting. And the third are a few thoughts on the quote-unquote better player hypothesis and how that applies to collecting. So let's get started here. The first segment is this, The Antidote to the Bull Market. So something I've been keeping an eye on as a proxy for the supply that's entering the market is how many copies of cards are entering into the Fanatics Collect Premier auction, which is a monthly auction that has the requirement that the lots placed into it should be expected to sell for $10,000 or more. And I'm particularly looking at my particular PC players. In this case, that would be Michael Jordan. And this obviously we can look at price history and we can see the movement that's been happening price wise. We can look at indexes, we can look at individual cards, we can look in the aggregate, but price is part of the story. Volume is another part of the story. We can look at industry wide volume, we can look at volume on player levels. And then there's this other thing that that sort of is related to price, and it's even more related to volume, but it's something a little bit different, which is how much supply is the bull market bringing to causing to come up for sale? And there are a lot of mechanisms that are operating here, some more obvious than others. Obviously, high prices are causing people who own copies of the same or similar cards to think about selling them. And especially given the cyclical nature of the sports card market, at least in some areas, if not all. And by cyclical, I mean sometimes prices get high, sometimes they start to run away, and then sometimes they come back down, and around we go. So there's the nature of the prices themselves that's causing people to think about maybe selling some things, and that's the obvious one. But then there's less obvious pressures too. There's pressure from your collecting group. If your friends are sending things to sell right now, do you get a little FOMO and wonder, man, are they going to sell right now and do well, and then the market's going to correct, and then they're going to come back in and be able to get great cards at a better price, and should I be doing a little bit of this too? And then there's advice coming in from friends and from foes from all sides. People are advising on what to do, whether they're giving advice in a general sense or they're giving advice one-to-one directly to you. And then there is the council of representatives at companies in the hobby. And so this is the one that's, I think, the most difficult to see or to think about. But there are great people, very smart, intelligent, capable people, resourceful people who work in this space whose income is tied to, and whose ability to provide a living for themselves is tied to their ability to bring items in to sell on various marketplaces and platforms. And the bull markets and rising prices provides a great opportunity for those people to be able to make a pitch to collectors that says, look, this card is selling higher than it ever has. It's a great time to sell it. And I think those arguments or those ideas as presented are persuasive. So there's lots of different pressures that are coming down that are compelling people to think about selling. And let's see how that actually bears out. So like I said, I've been looking at this from Michael Jordan, and I gathered the data and then used ChatGPT to make this graphic for me. I wish ChatGPT could make prettier graphs, but nonetheless, it works. And so here's the data, the raw data that I gathered for the Fanatics Premier. The monthly offering, here are the number of Michael Jordan cards listed by month. January saw 20, February saw 20, March 28, April 29, May 26, June 38, July 22, August 43, and September 52 and counting. Now, I did this count yesterday, so there may even be more Michael Jordans that have been added to the auction, and they can continue to be added up until the end. That there's a process called flash, where they flashed the items, these late arriving items, into the auction after it's already launched. So we can see there that since January, there's been much more than a doubling in the supply of Michael Jordan cards coming to the Fanatics Premier. And the outlier here is July. Why did July only bring 22? Especially because sales volumes were rising in July, prices were rising in July. And I think the most typical explanation there, or the most obvious explanation, is that July is the month of the National. And so people don't necessarily want to sell their cards during that during the month in which everybody's traveling and spending money, not only on buying cards at the National potentially, but also on traveling to get there and the cost of accommodations and so forth. So I think there's a general tendency to avoid selling things in July, which I think that would probably be why July is a lower number. But the trend here is clear. You can see from the bar graph that I'm displaying on the screen here that the number of Michael Jordan cards listed in the Premier continues to increase. But let's look outside the scope of just a PC player of mine. Let's look at Kobe, who is another guy who's experiencing price growth. I think even more price growth than Michael Jordan, at least per their aggregate player indexes and card ladder. So for Kobe, here's how his numbers have been changing this year on a month-by-month basis. In January, there were 8 Kobe Bryant cards in the Fanatics Premier. In February, 12. In March, 19. April, 11. May 10, June 25, July 15, August 36, and September 35 and counting. So Kobe has gone from 8 in January to 35 or probably more by the time the auction ends in September. So that's what even more than a 4x. So whereas Jordan had increased by a little bit more than 2.5 times, Kobe's supply has increased by more than fourfold since the beginning of the year. And that is commensurate with the fact that Kobe's prices have gone up more than Jordan's have this year. And then finally, how about the full auction, the full offering? And so doing the counts, but this time focusing only on trading cards. So that's going to be sports cards and non-sports cards and TCG, entertainment cards, and so on. And also sealed products. So there will be lots in these various auctions of, boxes or cases or things like that. So counting all these trading card and trading card related products, here's how many lots of these things have appeared since the beginning of 2025. In January, there were 119, February 122, March 230, April 217, May 166, June 304, July 163, August 317, September 395 and counting. And I would guess that number will exceed 400 eventually. I think the total number of lots actually is slightly over 400, but that includes some memorabilia items. And the tracking that I'm doing using Card Ladder, and just the thing that I care about is stuff that's in the category of cards and not things that aren't cards. So just looking at cards and card products, we see that there's been more than a tripling. So January 119 up to September 395 plus, likely to end over 400. So there's the story of supply. And again, we see the outlier of July here, where July was less than half of the number of items that we now see in September. And again, I think that's the impact of the National. So here's my big takeaway here. People are thinking carefully, cautiously, excitedly, nervously about what does this bull market mean? How long does it last? When does it end? What comes after? And there are a lot of ways to analyze it. We can sort of structurally analyze it as it relates to time, temporally. As the seasons are changing, professional sports are resuming. How will people's attention spans be divided? Now that they're watching the NFL, they're playing fantasy football. The NBA is going to come back. The NHL is going to come back. The MLB playoffs are going to start. The World Series is going to be on. Generally speaking, my sense of things, and but there are some people who vocally disagree with me. But my sense of things is that this period of time right now is a time when people's attention, both because of fatigue reasons, people have spent a lot of time thinking about cards in the off season and they sort of want to take a break, and also their attention being divided in many more directions. That this is a time when the market tends to take a breath. And there's also the holiday spending hypothesis too, which is that people will also start ramping down their expenditures in sports cards as they sort of budget for buying gifts for loved ones during the holiday seasons. So I do think that there are several reasons to think that on the horizon the market's going to possibly cool off and calm down. But the supply aspect of this is another part that should be discussed too. So, and that's sort of the big takeaway here, is that this bull market, it seems to me, is inducing a flood of supply. When, roughly speaking, we're going from 100 items in Premier, which has a requirement, like I mentioned, of the item must be worth $10,000 or more. We're going from roughly 100 of those at the beginning of the year to 400 now. Almost, the precise number is going from 119 to something around 395 or higher, almost a quadrupling. Sellers are deciding, and demonstrably deciding, that they would rather sell their items at these prices than keep them at a rate of 4 times what their sentiment towards selling around January. So something to keep in mind there, and this is part of the story of the bull market and how it develops, and then which direction it goes, is that supply is most certainly an antidote to runaway prices. That supply will correct that, because if there's 4 times as many items in this price range to purchase, that either the current pool of buyers will need to increase their expenditure by at least 4 times, and if they want to sustain increasing prices, they'll need to continue it'll need to be even more, right? Because they can't just spend a commensurate amount to what they were spending in January to sustain the rate of increase. They actually have to continue to pay more than the previous person paid. So that either the current pool will need to spend many multiples more, or and this is certainly plausible, that more people need to keep coming in, and there is reason to think that more people have come in. There's also reason to think that people who are on the sidelines for the last few years now have the confidence to quote unquote buy into strength. So there could be people coming back off the sidelines. There could be new people coming in. There could be more courage and boldness from people who have been there all along, and more the competitive juices are flowing. But certainly sustaining price increase with 400 roughly lots is requires a much larger outlay than sustaining it at 100. So that's the story. That's the headline going into the fall and into the winter months, is how will the market reconcile the increase in supply, the increase in aggregate volume, with the increase in prices? Because the structural tendencies of those are to go in opposite directions. If supply is increasing, that makes it much harder to sustain price increasing. So there's some market talk. Now let's get into segment 2 of today's episode, which is the role of storytelling in collecting. So this segment is going to be about content creation, but it's not going to be about the typical content creation. This isn't about podcasting. This isn't about making YouTube videos or doing interviews or live streaming or anything like that. This is about the content creation that we all make as collectors when we decide to go on social media and share a card, or when we see our friends in person at a show and we show off a card that we've acquired. That I'm trying to really narrow in on that piece of content, that and to sort of put a spotlight on the fact that it is content too, and that we all are content creators. That when we share cards, and when we tell the story of cards, and when we show images of cards, that we're creating a piece of content when we do that. So here's sort of how I've evolved to look at this project, the project of content creation, when I share a card. And I find that that's increasingly becoming more deliberate about how I approach sharing cards, becoming more thoughtful about it, increasingly taking it more seriously, makes it more fun and more challenging and more invigorating, but also causes it to take a lot more time and a lot more care and a lot more attention to detail. So, once upon a time, when I first started posting my cards to Instagram around 2016, my posts would just be, I'd put the card on a stand and I'd try to take a nice photo of it with nice lighting, and then I might give it a sentence. I might say something like a cool card that I just got. Like that was the whole thing. That was my content offering. And today I'm running up against the word limit in the Instagram caption, and I oftentimes have to trim stuff and take stuff out and lose the opportunity to say all of the things I'd like to say, although I do think that word limit is good. But anyway, the project of posting a card has really become sort of like like receiving the assignment to do a book report or to write an essay in class. Was things that I enjoyed doing. And I think a lot of us in the hobby, actually, if we're diving into a topic that we're excited about and that we like to learn about, that we actually enjoy doing it too. And so there's a lot of research that goes into producing content, especially meaning content of sharing a card. And the research, it doesn't all just happen at once for one card. It can, but research research overlaps. Like if I'm doing research for one card and thinking about how I want to present this card and tell its story, that research can actually end up influencing me to come to admire a card that I hadn't even thought about before. And then all of a sudden, that card maybe shows up a year later, and now this research that I did led to me getting this particular card. And there's these ripple effects, or a domino effect, where the research leads to other research, the research leads to other acquisitions, and philosophies and approaches get built and developed and fleshed out. But there's a lot of research, and I'm going to use as an example for this whole section a Patrick Mahomes card that I finally posted to Instagram last week. And I had done a lot of content on Patrick Mahomes cards over the summer. Those were some of the very first HOJ-Casts that I ended up posting to YouTube. None of them made it to the podcast feed. I didn't start sharing HOJ-Casts to podcast platforms until around episode 10, I think. But some of the earlier episodes can be found earlier on, and one of them that I did was a ranking of every Mahomes patch autograph card from his rookie season, or technically every Mahomes memorabilia autograph card from his rookie season, because some of them aren't patches, and ranking them by market value. So that was a lot of there's layers of research there. There was price research, which some people really like the price research aspect. I like doing price research. And then there was checklist research, which some people really like, and I absolutely love checklist research and discovering the full offering of cards. And both checklist research takes much longer, but both matter. But anyway, so I sort of tried to find the value of a roughly mint, or I think I called it mintish, copy of each of the base versions of Mahomes memorabilia autograph cards from his rookie season, and rank all of them, inserts, base set, all of them. And then also I would list out all the different parallels that each one had, and if I could find a sale of one of the Apex parallels, one of the one of one parallels, then I would maybe document that sale or some information about that sale too. So that content exists. That was like a 2-hour video I did. I don't think people liked it. I don't think very many people got much out of it. And that's probably mostly maybe on my presentation of it, or also just the fact that that the research is that going through the depths of the research, that's more for me. That's something that I'm learning from, and that's not necessarily something that's amenable to audiences. It's just too dense, it's just too much. But anyway, so my Mahomes research, though, that was just that whole project that was like really weeks of research culminating. But that was just one aspect of the research. That was actually me focusing specifically on the Mahomes memorabilia autograph cards, and the whole reason for doing that research was just to sort of find out, where does one particular Mahomes memorabilia autograph card rank, to see if it's a card that to try and figure out what I should pay for a particular card, and also to find out where it might rank in the eyes of the markets, and sort of to see if there's any misalignment between the full Mahomes offering and the market, and so on and so forth. So it was a project that I was doing that was very instructive. But my research on Mahomes began years ago, when I first started really looking seriously at his cards. And the first thing that I did, and that's what I have shown on the screen here, is a spreadsheet. And the spreadsheet is a list of every single Mahomes card from his rookie season. subject to a few constraints. So I always put a little note section here. So this checklist, I see rookie year only, 2017, but then I also included 2016, which is pre-rookie, so that I could bring in the select XRC also, which was an insert set that year. Then football only, no multi-sport cards, pro uniform only, and no printing plates. So those are caveats that need to be issued in the era of proliferation. And so then that caused me to say these are the brands that ended up being excluded from 2017. 4 of them were excluded because they show them in Texas Tech, and then one of the products from 2017 actually didn't have any Mahomes cards in it. The product called Eternal. Okay, so then we get to that full checklist that I compiled, and it's just got thousands of rows. I suppose a total of 1,264 rows. I mean, I tried to cover everything. I've got Panini Instant in here, Panini Black Friday, and all of the more traditional standard brands. And then I started breaking them down further for different aspects of research that I was doing. Here's a screen that had some of the price research that I was doing. These are more screens sort of doing price research. And then what I want to get to here, so one way that I started narrowing the group of Mahomes cards, especially given just the breadth of offerings that Mahomes truly has when you look at his full checklist, is I wanted to narrow it in to how many Mahomes one-of-ones exist and only solo cards. So that full checklist has multiplayer cards, and he's on a lot of multiplayer cards. He's got cards with lots of other players, teammates, other people who were drafted alongside of him. So I wanted to narrow into only solo one-of-ones of Patrick Mahomes. And then I found that there are 252 of those. So that's still a pretty big number. And then I wanted to narrow in further from there. So how can we keep on narrowing it? So then I went to memorabilia autograph one-of-ones, and still there's 104. And so then I wanted to narrow in even further and say, well, if we focus on only first appearing base set cards, something that description is sometimes summed up as a true rookie card. So it's a card from Mahomes' rookie year, it's from the base set, and it's the first appearing. So how many of those? And so Mahomes has 34 total true rookie cards. That includes memorabilia autograph and not. He has 47 one-of-ones in that group. And then if I narrow into only the memorabilia autograph cards and how many one-of-ones of those exist, the count, I believe, is 30. So now I've sort of narrowed into a group, a cluster, a category where, okay, I've narrowed this into 30. Things get interesting at that 30 level. And so then I just keep in my mind, what are those 30? And I keep an eye out for them. And these 30 almost never, ever appear. But in case they do, and then the other one, then I also really like the non-memorabilia, non-autograph ones too. I mean, all 47 one-of-one parallels to his 34 true rookie cards. I know what they are. I know what they look like. I keep an eye out constantly for them. If I'm ever walking a show, if I'm ever online or whatever, I'm always looking for these. Now, I like some a lot more than I like others, but any one of those cards is extremely special. And I can already think to myself, and this to bring things back now to this role of storytelling. So this research enables me to know which cards have a compelling story right off the bat. And I know that those one-of-ones to true rookie cards of Mahomes, that is a very compelling tagline to me. If a card can say that, if a card can say, I am a one-of-one, now the cards are talking now. If a card can say to me, if it's talking to me through the display case, I am a one-of-one from Mahomes' rookie year, and I parallel a true rookie card, you have got my interest. But still, there's so many ways to distinguish them and so many ways to tell stories. But the point that I wanted to make here, which I belabored, is that a lot of research goes into this, and not just research in the moment, but the research builds, and then the returns that you get, the intellectual returns from the research compound. So the sooner I start doing the research and the more I think about it, the more benefit I get in the aggregate. The more I learn, the more I can become a capable storyteller, and so on and so forth. But it starts with the research. It doesn't just get pulled out of thin air. So once the research has been done, and then we get to the storytelling part. And so I'm going to use my most recent Instagram post of this card, and I have it here sitting on my table just for inspiration, just because I like looking at it, I like fidgeting with it, I like holding it. I'm going to use my post about this Mahomes card to do this segment, to show how I told the story of this card through the Instagram post, through the Instagram caption, and through the carousel of different images that I attached, and just sort of walk through what I was thinking, why I did it that way, and sort of how this whole storytelling enterprise actually unfolds here. So the card itself is shown on the screen as the Vertex 1/1 of Mahomes, and from the base set. And so we're going to walk through this here, and I'm gonna talk about the whole caption and see what we can figure out. So here's how I start it. I start the caption off with this. Mahomes was not part of many first issues of product lines. By 2017, Panini's legacy brands, Prism, Select, Optic, National Treasures, Flawless, Immaculate, and so on, had already been established. But he was part of three firsts. They are Vertex, XR, and Contenders Optic. So right away, the research is very important here, because the research is allowing me to tell a story about the uniqueness of this card, and a meaningful uniqueness. And that uniqueness is that Mahomes. So the framing here is coming from the point of view that products have firsts. You have the first year of Prism, which is 2012. You have the first year of National Treasures. You have the first year of Flawless, the first year of Immaculate. And as time goes by, and especially as the Panini era comes to a close, these firsts are increasingly celebrated. And the importance of firsts, of the most in-demand premium brands, and the best players within them, or the most collectible players within them, seems to be taking on an extra importance, especially in this particular bull run. One of the trends they've noticed in this bull run is that rather than being centered around prospects and up-and-coming and active players, which was more the case a few years ago, this bull run is certainly more centered around all-time greats, around retired players, around cards of those players from obvious iconic or obvious popular brands and sets. So what I'm doing here, and the framing of this and the opening of this, is to say, yeah, I know this isn't any of these big, this card isn't hailing from any of those big brands, but, and I'm not against that, right? So like, I have also on the table, I have another one of my favorite Mahomes cards, which is, this is his first Select Black 1/1 from his rookie season. All right. And it's from the premier level in Select. He was not in Concourse. So the first ever 1/1 from Mahomes in his rookie season, that's the card right there. So, and look, so I'm not against Select. I'm certainly not against these big brands. I love collecting cards from them. It can get very pricey, and I'm against that. I try to get the most value out of my precious collector dollars, but I love cards from those premium products too. But the point here is that while Vertex is not a premium product, it does have something else going for it that most of us might not know of, which is that Vertex is one of just three products that debuted with Mahomes. And when we start thinking about that, about players debuting with a product, so some other examples of players debuting with a product, LeBron James debuting with Exquisite Collection basketball, Stephen Curry debuting with National Treasures basketball. When you get those things lining up, a historic all-time great player and a historic highly collectible player lining up with the debut of a product, and a product that also goes on to be historic and popular, that's a very, very powerful and compelling combination to me as a collector. Now, we don't have that here. We have a football player who's on the cusp of possibly entering football's Mount Rushmore. But the product, the Vertex brand, for reasons that we're going to discuss a little bit later, it's not going to be Exquisite. It's not going to be National Treasures. In fact, it's a one-off. But before we get to that part, that's the point here. To start with, the storytelling of this card begins with the unique nature of Vertex as a product, which is it's one of just three products that debuted with Mahomes. The rookie year of Vertex lines up with the rookie year of Mahomes. And that was also true for Contenders Optic and for XR. So that next portion of this caption goes on to say, the Vertex product debuted and concluded in 2017, making it a true one-off, which is unusual for the Panini era. So here's more uniqueness. So unlike XR, unlike Contenders Optic, Vertex was a one-off as a standalone. Vertex came out, had one season, done. Vertex would show up again in a subsequent year of Chronicles as a brand, but just as an insert within the brand of Chronicles. So it unceremoniously disappeared. It just had this 1 year Vertex as its own thing, and then sort of shows up as an insert in Chronicles a few other times that it's done. And that's unusual for the Panini era. And here's the touch point here, particularly why this speaks to me as a 90s collector, why this adds a uniqueness that's worth pointing out. 90s collecting featured a lot of one-offs, so or very brief runs. So but in the 90s it happened at the level of the card, not necessarily at the level of the brand. So, for example, in the 90s, we had insert sets that would just appear for a few seasons, like Golden Touch appeared in 96, and then it appeared in 97 in basketball, and then that was it. Or Thrill Seekers. I believe Thrill Seekers had just 2 appearances, also 96 and 97 as well. And then there are one-offs from the 90s. Some of the most collectible inserts from the 90s are one-offs, such as Platinum Portraits. That was a one-off insert set. I think Noise Boys was a one-off insert set. A Cut Above, I think, turned out to be a one-off insert set. Or if it wasn't, it had very few. And also my reference point is Michael Jordan. So forgive me if I'm referencing some of these as being one-offs, but in fact, they continued on. But I'm ignorant of them because I only follow Michael Jordan's appearances in these sets. But the idea here is that a player would just get 1 or maybe 2 appearances in a type of card, and that's it. So like the PMG Green is the pinnacle of this, that each player got 1 PMG Green from the 90s, and that's it, no more. Each player got 1 PMG Red from the 90s, that's done. Which is quite a different story than how things work today, where a player can get a card like a Prism Gold, and then that card comes out with a new design, with a new season, with a new caption, with new statistics, with a new image, but that card type, that card lineage repeats year after year after year. So a player gets their first year of Prism Gold, and they have a second year of Prism Gold, and the supply goes from 10 to 20, and then they get another year, then they have 30 and 40 and so on. And that's a stark contrast from how the one-offs or the very short-lived card types are from the 90s. And so here we have a card type in the Panini era, in the era characterized by repetition, by the repetition of the Prism Gold parallel, by the repetition of the Kaboom insert appearing every year, but sometimes in different products and under a different umbrella, but always branded as Kaboom. And so, those are just several examples. Optic Golds, Optic Gold vinyls, the Prism Black Finites. There's lots of cards from the Panini era that became staples and hallmarks of offerings, and that you can count on that coming out year after year after year. The Logoman Autograph is a very popular card that comes out, very popular type of card that comes out in multiple products year after year for as many players as Panini can get to sign and obtain memorabilia from. So the point that I was calling attention to with the one-off is, and the reason why it resonated with me, and it might resonate with 90s collectors, is that for on these one-offs, there's an extra level of limited supply that 90s collectors take for granted, and that Panini collectors are not used to. So there's a connection point there to me as a 90s collector when I look at that and I say, this is actually reminiscent of the much briefer lifespans of card types from the 90s as contrasted against the ultramodern era. All right, so then I go on next to point out the 2017 Vertex football introduced capstones. And so now I'm transitioning from talking about the brand to talking about the particular type of card. Capstone's design is unmistakable, featuring quad memorabilia pieces and an on-card autograph. So here I'm just sort of describing to you not just what the card looks like, but also that this particular configuration, this 4 memorabilia pieces plus an on-card autograph, that this is a very unique configuration. But also just explaining to you, and sort of, because I think most people have probably seen a card of a patch autograph card of this design before, and so through research, I'm telling you, in in football products, this is referred to as capstones. And now I'm going to make an important distinction here. So I could say, while capstone started in 2017 Vertex, it next appeared in 2019 Majestic, and then it found a permanent home in Black, where it has lived since 2020. An example of all 7 years of capstones to date are shown in this post's carousel. So I went and I grabbed a picture of some of the capstones cards from each of the 7 seasons, and I just made a little mosaic image of them through the help of ChatGPT, because I have absolutely no graphic design skills at all, but I can feed images to GPT and give it directions and have it spit out something that looks okay, which is what this is here. And so now I'm showing how the capstones card design has continued, even as Vertex unceremoniously terminated immediately after its debut. And so the point that's being made here, and sort of the diversion, is that whereas Vertex is a one-off and it debuted with Mahomes, Capstones debuted with Mahomes also, but the manufacturer, in this case Panini, continued on with it. So Capstones would go from Vertex, it would then move over to Majestic, and now it's found a home in Black, where it's existed for 5 consecutive seasons. And so there's an interesting divide there, which I'm going to touch on a little bit later in the caption, which is that while Vertex is maximally obscure in the sense that it had the most limited run you could possibly have as a standalone product of just one season, the Capstones card type has gone in the opposite direction. The Capstones card type was latched onto by Panini and continued to be produced season after season, eventually finding a home in Panini Black. I go on to say Mahomes has 18 total true RPAs, and we've explained before what true means. I have true in quotation marks, that meaning the first appearing in a base set, and all are pictured in this post's carousel as well. And so I have gathered here 18, and this was the product of that research I did over the summer. So I was able to just go grab these images really quickly, and I ranked them according to their market value in a grade of mintish condition, again, which we talked about. So like here are the top 5 in market value in mintish condition, and then I'm not going to read all the different brands of them, but I show all 18. And so what I continue, 7 of these 18 true RPAs have on-card autographs, and they are National Treasures, which we can see right here, Immaculate, there's the Immaculate, Impeccable, Encased, Vertex, which there's the Vertex, and then so that there's 5 of the 7, and then also Limited, which is on the second slide of the carousel, and Preferred, which is on the third. So there's all 7. And I've shown you what all 7 look like in case you were curious. Those are the 7 on-card autograph RPAs of Mahomes from 2017. And then here's the punchline. Vertex is the only one issued among them, which is a first issue. So Vertex is the only on-card RPA to debut with Mahomes. We're starting to get very subtle here. So like, people might not care about that at all, and I totally get it, but I do think that's a part of the story here, is that Mahomes has these 7 on-card true RPAs, and all of them come from legacy brands except for the Vertex. Vertex and Mahomes both had their rookie season together. I continue that the base 2017 Vertex Capstones RPA is numbered to 99, and that is the image on the carousel slide with the other RPAs. It has 4 parallels: Onyx 1 of 1, Marble out of 10, Granite out of 25, and Quartz out of 49, which makes this Mahomes, you guessed it, a 1 of 1 of 1. So the point there is to call attention back to the obscurity or the rarity of the Mahomes Vertex 1 of 1, that there are no other 1 of 1s, that this is it. And so the story here becomes, from Vertex, which is a product that had just 1 year of release, that this is the only patch autograph card of Mahomes that's numbered to 1 in that whole product. So if you want a patch autograph from Vertex, it's only the versions of this card, and if you want the rarest one, there's just 1, right? So like we're layering, the storytelling here is building up to expressing the total rarity and uniqueness that this card has, and the number of different angles that you can take from it, the number of different ways you can look at it. And so using the nature of the fact that it's an on-card autograph, using the nature that it's from a product that is a one-off, that the product debuted with Mahomes, suddenly there's just layers and layers of uniqueness and rarity that get piled onto this card. And all of a sudden it's taken on a different level of meaningfulness to me as a collector, as I sort of think about all the different approaches that I can take to thinking about this card, all the different ways that I can tell this card's story that show just how unusual and unique it is. And finding that level of rarity and uniqueness, especially in the ultramodern era, is quite compelling, because the reality is we were looking at the Mahomes spreadsheet and the thousands of rows of cards, and even then the 252 different one-of-ones of him from 2017, and even the roughly 100 or so that are memorabilia autograph. And even then, when we narrow it down to the first appearing base or the true, and then we narrow it down to one-of-ones of there's still 30. But here we've found a number of different ways to show that this card is a one-of-one, even within the one-of-ones. And I've as a collector, I think I find that a compelling part of its story. So then, having given these facts about the card and framing those facts, now I'm going to give my opinion, or how I make sense of that, and just in one paragraph. And I sum it up to say, all of that is a prelude to say this Mahomes Vertex Capstones RPA Onyx 1-of-1 is an exceedingly unique card. This is consistent with my recent pivot into obscurity and away from quote-unquote iconic. My collector brain is delighted by a card that is maximally rare, off the radar, and possessing a compelling story that simply hasn't yet been told. And so I think that paragraph mostly speaks for itself. And then I go on to conclude that Mahomes, I wrap it up by sort of explaining why I'm compelled to collect Mahomes cards, and sort of this is giving a different insight into how I approach things as a collector. I say Mahomes is currently boasting 5 total MVPs, which makes him the most decorated player whose rookie year fell during the Panini era. Runners up include Jokic with 4 total MVPs, Giannis and Curry with 3, Gilgeous-Alexander, Kawhi, and Lamar Jackson with 2. Now, there still is plenty of time for this deck to shuffle, but the likelihood of Mahomes going down as one of the most accomplished players of the Panini era is high, and that's a major factor in why I started collecting him several years ago. So once again, that is, I'm going to take a quick swig of water here, but that's giving some more insight into how I'm thinking and looking at this as a collector. The final thing I wanted to do on this particular card, and in my attempt at telling its story, is to see how it resonated with people who were willing to make public comments. And so here's a nice one right off the bat. Not Fast One jokes. Did Spinatron write this? Congrats on the pickup. Always loved this set. So the Spinatron joke is a good one, because Spinatron is the antithesis of posting, very short, quick, concise posts. Spinatron will spin yarns and go into the greatest depth. And so anytime a post shows up that's just layering paragraphs of story and explanation on, is going to remind people of that. And it is something that stands out. And anytime people kind of come out and sort of start rambling about their card and telling the story about their card in great length, is that it's going to command the Spinatron comp. I posted this in conjunction with the debut of the NFL season, so of course I actually jinxed Mahomes, who would go on to lose the game. A buddy of mine makes a joke that basically he's saying, look, you're collecting Mahomes autos, but you still don't have any MJ autos. When are you getting one of those? Diamond card collector Pot comes in and just offers a very kind congratulations. He is the person that I got this card from. Is very smooth and easy to make a deal with him. Here's a comment about does Mahomes have a 1-of-1 CD-ROM rookie, poking fun at the power deck pickup. And then here is the man himself. Spinatron jumps in. He likes the caption. He likes the curation. And then perhaps the ultimate form of validation, he notes that he was thinking about getting this card once upon a time too. Here's a comment that says, excellent point about the Mahomes 5 MVPs. I know that he's a Mahomes collector. So the thing that resonated with him was sort of my description of why Mahomes is a compelling player. Here comes a comment about cornerstones in the NBA. That's the version, the quad mem plus autograph formats. In the NBA, it's called cornerstones. The NFL, it's called capstones. And he's pointing out that the market for those is doing quite well right now. So Mike comes in and says, I love this pivot. He's referring to the section of the post where I think where I said I've pivoted into more obscure and away from iconic, especially when the obscure card has a great story that hasn't been told yet. And so I think that's the part that resonated with him. Here's another commenter who says they like the Vertex cards. Somebody else who's just sort of commenting, nice patches, auto. Sports Card Dad jumps in. I love the capstone card. So the part that resonated with him was the part about capstones. And that's the duality of this card, is that while it is a one-off, and while Vertex, just came and went very quickly, but that the capstones type of card continued on and became a staple in the memorabilia autograph offerings from the Panini catalog. And so that allows this card to connect with other people who maybe have collected other products or who have stumbled into a capstones card, whether it's from Vertex or whether it's from Black or Majestic. So that's a connection point that can exist among collectors, is that the capstones style of card. And are there just sort of coming through here? So Sustenance Cards jumps in and says, this has always been my favorite RPA. So the thing that he's thinking about or that's resonating with him is sort of looking at the menu of RPAs, and this is the one that he likes. Somebody else comes in and says, that's a cool card. I didn't even know that it existed. So that's a very rewarding part of the storytelling process that I like, is if I can put a spotlight on a card that's cool that people didn't know about, that there's an act of creativity there that's pretty rewarding. And then we a few more. No, another joke about the length of the post. I ain't reading all that, but I'm happy for you, or I'm sorry that it happened. So, and then more sports cards said, looking forward to hearing you talk more about this. So actually, it was that comment that sort of allowed me to feel like, okay, maybe I'll use this as a case study to dive into the storytelling of sports cards topic that I'd like to jump into. All right, so that's been a walkthrough of how I presented the story of this card. Certainly there are probably things I could have done better. I had to make decisions, like I made no mention of any of those counts, like the fact that Mahomes has 252 one-of-ones from his rookie season, that roughly 100 are memorabilia autograph, and that roughly 30 of those parallel true memorabilia autograph cards. And those are interesting numbers and good research. But you have to pick and choose what parts of the story of this card are you going to tell and which ones aren't you. So that's part of it. So what I would kind of describe this approach to card collecting is, or a way to sort of like summarize the whole thing in a nice, neat, tidy little phrase, is sort of this is like the museum label approach to a card. So if I'm imagining that my card is sitting in the museum of cards, what would I put on the label? Just like if we walk into an art museum, we can look at a piece of art and then there can be a caption on a placard next to it that is, sometimes they're very long, sometimes they're not, sometimes they go into the background behind the artist, sometimes they talk about how this piece sits in relation to the history of art. So what would I put on the placard if this were a display that was showing off my card? How would I best tell the story of this card? What does tell the story of this card? And the risk, of course, and I fell victim to it here, but I can't help it. And I don't mind erring on the side of being verbose, but the risk here is that way too much has been said. That that if I were trying to market this card to sell it, that it would be much smarter and more effective if I were able to tell if I really shortened up the story of this card, or at least the tagline of this card, if I could just sum it up in just one word or just one phrase, or at most a sentence or two. So, but I'm not trying to sell it. Instead, I'm experimenting with the development of telling the story of this card, and then I'm actively looking for feedback. I'm looking for what is resonating with people, what isn't resonating with people. how off-putting is it to have this big, long, wordy thing? And it is a little bit off-putting. I know that it is. Several people commented to that effect, and I'll be completely honest. I very rarely read the full caption that anybody puts on their cards on Instagram. So it's a bit hypocritical for me to expect others to do that for mine. But I tried to make it worth their while if they do. That an enormity of research and thought went into it before posting it. So this is the museum label approach. Like, I really enjoy that. I really enjoy thinking about what I would fill up that placard with if I were tasked with telling the story of this card. And that's not so different from what marketplaces and auction houses do when they provide descriptions of cards. But the intention of the description is a little bit different. The intention of the description at the auction house level is to induce a desire to purchase, whereas here I'm trying to explain why I added this card to my collection, what it says about my collecting and my evolution as a collector, and giving me ways to relate to fellow collectors. But the heart of it is still mostly the same, which is, tell me what's cool about this card. Tell me what's most compelling about it. Tell the story of it. And the art of content creation, as understood as telling the story of cards, is very nascent. I think I'm still very new to it. I'm still learning it, refining it, discussing it, thinking about it, strategizing about it. One of the ways that I do that is just making a podcast about it that forces me to think about it, to analyze it in real time, to review it, to think about it through the eyes and ears of an audience member. That, for my personality type, that can really help me develop and think critically about it. Okay, so then there's also, so this is all taking place in the context of an Instagram post. If I were to, and I did, go post this on other platforms, like, for example, I went to several Mahomes collector groups and a few one-of-one groups on Facebook, and I posted this card. And in that instance, I said nothing. I actually used the picture, not a scan, but I used a picture that I took of the card in my hand, and I posted that. And then I think a lot of the rules of these groups sort of say you need to clarify if you're posting it for sale, if you're just posting it to show off. And so all I would say is just, not for sale, not for trade, just showing off. That's all that I posted. So all the thought, all the research, all the storytelling goes away. And when I'm in that particular medium, and I mostly apply this to Facebook and Twitter, if I'm posting a card there, I just want to take a nice looking picture of it. And then I just want to keep my description of it super short and sweet. Really, the picture has to do everything. If it looks nice and the picture carries the card well, then it will be compelling. And if not, then it won't be. So the medium is important too. Like Instagram, that's why I think Instagram has become a hub for at least some groups of collectors, is because it is sort of the one medium where you have this caption, and it's normal and it's accepted to fill up that whole caption if you'd like. And that it's the platform that seems to be most conducive with going into depth about storytelling of cards. But all this to say, within the museum label approach to making content about cards, there is the question of how much information can I actually expect an audience member to keep in their head. And sort of reviewing the comments shows that people latch on to like one thing, or at least one thing. They find one thing to chime in about. And I think that's very instructive. So I can tell, lots of different stories about this card, and I can try to weave all those stories together and sort of show how they combine to make it particularly unique and particularly meaningful to me. But at the end of the day, the takeaway is just going to be one or two things. And so I think that that's important to keep in mind, sort of hearkening back to this idea that a card should have, especially in the context of selling it, that the sale will be most effective if the card can have just one tagline. But the tagline, it should really maybe be thought of like this: the card should have a great tagline that hooks me in as a potential buyer. But then once I'm hooked in, then there should be depth and substance too, that should seal the deal, that should fully compel me. In the same way that a movie can have a trailer, or a commercial. And then if I find that advertisement for it compelling enough, then I want to go in and watch the full 2 hours. And so here, the depth here, almost like maybe the mechanism of the Instagram post is like, if you see it and you say, oh, that's a cool looking card, and especially if that's a card that I don't know that much about or I haven't seen before, let me click in and see if the content creator who's posted it, or if the collector who's posted it is telling the story of this card. Because not only does a compelling story teach about the card itself, but way more often it doesn't really have the effect of like making people want that card or getting or having an appetite worked up for that card, because it took so many different factors for me as an individual collector to land on this card. It had to be this player, had to have this aesthetic, had to come from this season, and there's but some people will overlap with some things. So people might see this and then they might be interested in, like a Lamar Jackson collector might be like, oh, that's cool. I wonder if Lamar Jackson has some cool capstones cards. How does that, and maybe they start down a research path and see what capstones means to Lamar's offering. And unfortunately, they're going to find out that there aren't capstones in 2018. But then you get a whole interesting approach, right? Like if Lamar shows up in 2019 capstones, then it's not a rookie card. It will certainly be flying under the radar, but it will be his first capstones. And so there's an interesting conceptual pairing that could exist between Lamar's first capstones and Mahomes' first capstones. And there's a sneaky, under the radar aspect, especially to the Lamar, because it's not a rookie year card, so the premium won't be there, but sophisticated collectors will know that is his first appearance with capstones. I hope that's right. I've made some inferences there, but anyway, but the general point stands. Even if my particular assessment of Lamar is maybe a little bit off, but I'm pretty sure, my captures is 2017 Vertex and 2019 Majestic. So I don't even know if Lamar it would be in 2019 Majestic, or maybe Lamar doesn't even show up until 2020 Prism Black. So that might be Lamar's first capstones. But anyway, that's sort of the idea, is that the history and the storytelling of the card, at least when I'm looking at other people's history and storytelling, the tendency that it has on me is that it just makes me, it activates systematic structural thinking in my brain. It all sorts of ideas start firing off, and then I start applying it to my own collecting, to the players that I like, and the sets that I like, or that might be interesting to me. And like, this whole story of the capstones and the Vertex, somebody might look at it and be like, I don't like those. I don't like the fact that Vertex only existed for a year, and I don't like the way the capstones look. But they might identify a parallel structure that existed in some other product or some other type of card, and that the structure of it, the theory of it, might be appealing to them, even if the particular practice of it isn't. So that's one of the many ways that sort of storytelling, sharing, teaching about one's passion for a particular card can have a ripple effect on other collectors in very indirect ways, but still inspirational. So, but that circles me back into the topic of how does somebody get compelled to come in and read more? And a lot of the time it's just like a beautiful card, or whatever. But also a different way that can happen, and it almost needs to happen, is that a card needs to be summed up succinctly, even if it has this great story waiting to be told and it's paragraphs long and it's great. But how do we compartmentalize? How do we build a reference point that's much sharper and quicker? And one way is just the image, having the image of the card in our head. But conceptually, and so I think I kind of made a mistake here, or at least there's room for improvement here, because I end up calling this card a very lengthy title. In my post, I end up saying, this Mahomes Vertex Capstones RPA Onyx 1 of 1. That's just way too long. It's just way too many things to remember. Even like an hour after this podcast, I will have to think before I can recall that full title, because look at all the different categories of information that it contains. It contains the player, it contains the product, which is Vertex, capstones, which is the type of card within the product, RPA, which is another layer of description onto what the type of card is, Onyx, which is the name of the parallel, and then the print run, which is 1 of 1. So I need something, honestly, I need a nickname for this card. And this is something that I've been exploring as I've been continuing to quietly, privately flesh out how I'm going to think about telling the story of 90s Michael Jordan 1 of 1s. And something that I stumbled upon is that there's 72 90s Michael Jordan 1-of-1s. I need a nickname for all of these. Each one of those 72 needs to have a very short, sweet nickname, and I came up with 72. And same thing for this Mahomes. I need to come up with a short, sweet nickname, just one little word or maybe 2 or 3 words at the most that summarize this card. And so I think there's a couple different ways that I can think of it. I could call this the Vertex 1-of-1. That's presumptuous, doesn't name the player, but I could unravel that to sort of say, well, this is probably the is Mahomes the most decorated rookie from the rookie class? Yes, at least from the total MVPs metric. So in that sense, and Vertex just existed for 1 year, so it's bold, it's cocky, but this is the Vertex 1-of-1. But I'm not sure that that's really the right way to go. I'm not sure if Vertex is the first thing that should be thought about when it comes to this card. Vertex is a very cool theoretical concept. A vertex is where 2 lines meet and form a point. And then in particular, vertex is often used to 2 lines meeting at the highest point, sort of like an apex. So the idea, the things summoned up by vertex, the geometric imagery and the symbolic imagery, they connote cool things, but I don't know if I love the vertex. I don't know if I love the presumptuousness of calling it like the Vertex 1-of-1. So maybe I could say Mahomes Vertex 1-of-1, but then does anybody know or care what vertex is? So a different nickname could be the Capstones 1-of-1 or the Mahomes Capstones 1-of-1. And now I think we're maybe getting somewhere a little bit better. Capstones is a recognized card type, so playing into the appeal of capstones. And so using that and the capstones part is nice too, because Mahomes debuted with capstones. So the Mahomes Capstones 1-of-1 sort of invites you in. If you like capstones, if you like how those cards look, if you like Mahomes, if you like 1-of-1, sort of the meeting of all those things sort of invites you in. And then all of a sudden, as you're learning about the history of this card, you learn that Mahomes and capstones debuted together. So I think I like that. And then the final one I said is first year Mahomes Capstones 1-of-1. It's starting to get a little bit wordy there. But anyway, some ideas that I'm playing with. But I think maybe the Mahomes Capstones 1-of-1. It kind of has a ring to it too. Yeah, I think maybe that's what I'll end up summarizing this as is like this card. Like when I look at it, when I'm browsing through the PC box, when I'm showing it to somebody, whatever, the Mahomes Capstones 1-of-1. That's what it is. And then if that hooks somebody in, then from there they can learn many paragraphs of storytelling about this card if they're so inclined. All right, let's get to the final segment of today's show. Let's just make sure. Oh, there's 2 other topics there that I wanted to touch on really briefly. Let's see if I can just get these done in a few minutes before we get to the final segment. So one other topic that I had under this umbrella was, could we talk about cards? Can we talk about cards without ever using the words best, this is the best card, or this card is better than another card? And that is the challenge that I task myself with every single time that I talk about or share a card. Because anytime that I find myself saying that this card is the best or this card is better, I really need to ask myself, what am I actually saying? What am I using the word best as a summary for? And I should be more precise with my language, and I should actually say what I mean. So like if you go back and you look at this whole caption and the whole history and the whole storytelling of this card, never is it mentioned that this is the best card or this card or that this Mahomes is better than other cards. Instead, I try to say what I really mean, which is that Vertex is a one-off. Capstones debuted with Mahomes. Capstones has ended up having 6 subsequent seasons and 7 appearances in different seasons total. This card is a 1-of-1 and it's a 1-of-1-of-1. Mahomes, it has the most total MVPs of anybody who has a rookie season in the Panini era. That includes players like Jokic, Giannis, and Curry. Saying exactly what I mean. And then let the audience decide if that is better or worse or best or less than something else. And that's the challenge I actively give myself when I'm trying to tell a story of a card, is not to slip into the tendency to just proclaim something as the best and not do the work of explaining actually what I really mean by that. And what I mean by that is that this card has all these different properties. So that's a challenge. That's a thought experiment that I invite all collectors and storytellers and content creators of cards to think about, is suppose that we can't use the words best or better. How would we tell the story of our cards if we can't do that? And the other topic that I want to touch on is discovery versus invention. So, and you might sort of think to yourself, what's the difference, right? Like in science, if somebody discovers something or if somebody invents something, it's sort of those words almost seem interchangeable, but I don't think they are. I think they actually mean slightly different things, at least in the context of storytelling of sports cards. In science, you can sort of get into the discussion of, well, isn't sort of every scientific invention just sort of, even if it's invented, wasn't it always waiting there to be discovered? Isn't it a derivative of the physical laws of nature? But in sports card collecting and content creation, maybe it's a little bit different. So here's how I would weigh in on that. Discovery is when me as a collector, I'm discovering something hidden. I'm discovering something that was always there, but I hadn't seen it yet. And maybe lots of people hadn't seen it yet. So I'm discovering it, but it's there. I didn't build it. I didn't make it. It's there. Invention is creating something using other component parts that wasn't just waiting there. It wasn't always just lying under the surface, but instead it's inventing something. It's doing something a little bit more. Like, so discovery is more modest. Invention is more invention is more aggressive. It's more ambitious. Invention is sort of going beyond. Invention is saying, yeah, like this isn't hidden, this doesn't exist yet, but I'm going to invent it and I'm going to cause it to exist. So let me give some examples. So here's an example of what I mean by discovery. So discovery is discovering a first of something. So the idea of a card being a first is not new. That's not a novel concept. And a card being a first of something is a very compelling part of its story. So the discovery would be finding a card that's a first that you didn't know prior was a first. You've discovered a first, but you didn't discover the concept of the first, and you didn't come in and I didn't come in and make this card a first. I just discovered that it is a first. But it was something already existing that was just waiting to be discovered. By contrast, an example of an invention is something like what I used at the end of the Mahomes post, the total MVPs metric. That's a metric that I've invented. It's the synthesis of things that already exist. It's taking regular season MVPs plus championship game or championship series MVPs and combining them into one number and then ranking all the players according to them. I've invented that. Nobody else, to my knowledge, has done that. And so I'm creating something that wasn't waiting there. I mean, this is where it gets a little bit fuzzy. Like, was the combination of total MVPs just waiting there for somebody to discover it, or did I invent it? And that's fine. That's a fine point to make. And if somebody else was using total MVPs before me, great. I don't mean this to be a back patting exercise. In fact, I would much rather have preferred to have discovered total MVPs, because the way that I'm using it, rather than me being the inventor of it, because the way that I'm using it is I'm actually trying to use it as a useful proxy for sentiment towards players. And if I'm just inventing it, then I might be the only one who sees it that way, and that would be fruitless ultimately. But if I'm tapping into something that actually is resonating or approaching truth, if that measurement is actually indicating something meaningful about a player's legacy and the greatness of that player in a particular sport, then I'm approaching the direction where I want to be, which is I want to actually measure something meaningful and not just something that means something only to me, but ultimately it has weaknesses that I'm just not aware of. So anyway, there's some examples of the distinction between discovery and invention, and that's actually a great segue into the final section of the show, which is I just want to drop a few thoughts on the quote unquote the better player hypothesis. So the better player hypothesis, I credit the coinage of this phrase to a dialogue that's been going on, a very interesting and insightful dialogue between MK Sports Cards and Adam Gray, the Real 27 guy. And they've sort of been going back and forth and presenting arguments on either side that does it matter in terms of the collectability and in terms of the market prices realized for players? Does it matter, or is it outcome determinative that one player was a better player than the other player? So MK Sports Cards gave a few examples of like, Dirk Nowitzki versus Kevin Garnett's markets, and Shaquille O'Neal versus somebody else. And sort of he was sort of making the illustration that as of late, the markets for the players who are consensus better players than others have been increasing. So sort of vindicating the idea that in the long run, the player who is seen as the better player, the player who ranks higher on the all-time list of players in a particular sport, that ultimately they will become the most collectible. They will realize the highest market prices. And then Adam pushed back with several examples. He sort of pointed out that Penny Hardaway is nowhere near as accomplished as Hakeem Olajuwon, but a lot of their cards sell for similar prices, same type of card, or even that Hardaway might sell for more. And then of course the chief example, sort of the cause for the discussion, I think at the deepest level, is the comparison of Tim Duncan to Kobe Bryant. And the idea that Tim, here's like to use my very simple total MVPs metric, Tim Duncan has 5, Kobe Bryant has 3. But on the other hand, both of them have 5 total championships. If you start looking at other metrics, like when Cajun and I were doing our video series that Cajun put together for his YouTube channel, and he rolled out that Tim Duncan and Kobe Bryant, both, they are the 2 players in NBA history who have the most combined all NBA awards and all defensive awards, and they were both very similar. So there's different ways to sort of approach it, but I think even Adam might have seeded in an episode that if we're just looking at positive impact on winning, that maybe Tim Duncan slightly edges out Kobe. But, and the point that Adam was driving home, in contrast to the point that MK was making, is that a player's collectability is determined by many things other than where they rank all time or how much impact on winning that they had. And sort of using Kobe as a chief example of this, that the Kobe is one of the chief examples of cultural impact and popularity that extends beyond what they did on the floor. And so I am fascinated by this topic. I think this is a great topic, and I'm fascinated about what is it psychologically that causes people to find one player more collectible than the other, and how much truly does it matter where the player ranks all time. And I'm not going to settle that issue today. I don't know if I'll ever be able to settle it. And the answering that question would take a book. It would take lots and lots of research and lots and lots of comparisons, and you would need to have a gauge of public sentiment. And so that's the one little thing that I'm going to contribute to this. Or I'm not even sure if I'm making a contribution or if I'm just sort of piling on. I'm going to try to add something. All right, but I guess what I'm saying is I don't know if it's actually going to be a worthwhile contribution or if I'm just sort of throwing a scrap onto the pile. But here's what I want to contribute. On the topic of the better player hypothesis, on the topic of us figuring out if a player's all-time rank is the key and the overwhelming and the overriding determinative factor and what makes a player collectible and what influences their market prices. Think about this. If we were to take a poll of 3 groups, those groups being the general public, the sports card collecting hobby, and basketball experts, and we asked each of them, who was the better basketball player? And we don't define better, just who was better, Kobe or Tim Duncan, what would the results be? So here's how I think, my guess of how each of those groups would reply. I think the public would be somewhere in the neighborhood of 90% Kobe is better and 10% Tim Duncan is better. I think that's the sentiment of the general public. And I think you can see that because there are lots of members of the general public who say Kobe Bryant is the best player of all time. I see that on Twitter a lot. There are these stat mamba, like all these Kobe pages on Twitter, and they push the belief that either Kobe's the best all time or he's second best all time behind Jordan. And then it's not just them, it's not just online accounts either. It's like I believe Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, the reigning NBA scoring leader, Finals MVP, and regular season MVP, has said on numerous occasions that Kobe Bryant is the greatest player of all time. So here you have one of the greatest basketball players in the world publicly opining that Kobe Bryant is his GOAT. So, I think that the general public, or to use the pejorative, casual fan, not that Shea Gilgeous-Alexander is a casual fan, but I think the average fan, if you were to sort of ask them, they can't look up any research, they can't look up any stats, they just have to sort of answer who was better, Kobe or Tim Duncan. I think maybe 9 out of 10 is going to say Kobe, or maybe that's ambitious. Maybe it's 7 out of 10 or 6 out of 10, but the majority, I believe, are going to say Kobe. It would be, you could certainly talk me off of the idea that 9 out of 10 is high, but I don't think I would be. I think I would really need to see some strong evidence to the contrary if someone were to say the majority of the public writ large is going to say Duncan was better. Okay, the second group, the hobby. Among the sports collecting hobby, how many people are going to say Kobe was the better player versus Duncan if they had to reply on the spot immediately? And I think in the hobby, it's going to be probably 75% Kobe, 25% Duncan. So I think the hobby is a little more knowledgeable than the average sports fan about rankings and hierarchies of players and stuff, or maybe a lot more knowledgeable. But I think that you can just sort of look. Kobe has a lot of collectors. it was a very it was a moment of admirable forthrightness from Adam when he sort of said, well, maybe I could see an argument that Duncan had more of an impact on winning, because I think the vast majority of Kobe collectors would not make that allowance. I think and Kobe just he has many collectors in this hobby. So I think about 3 out of 4 participants of this hobby would, if you ask them to just spit out an answer, they would say Kobe's better. And even if you gave them time to research and dig into things, I think they could launch arguments and make compelling arguments that that Kobe was better, whatever better means. Better, of course, being the operative word here, can mean many different things to many different people. And then finally, the final group, the experts. The experts is where it flips. I think if you look at rankings that NBA journalists point out, or NBA authors or commentators, that I think it flips. I think about 3 out of 4 of those guys, whether it's like a Bleacher Report list or a book by NBA writers or historians of the game sort of chronicling things, a guy like Bill Simmons or something like that, I think about 3 out of 4 of those guys are going to say Duncan was better, whatever better means. 3 out of 4 of that group are going to say Duncan. So you have 2 groups, the public and the hobby, which I think the vast majority are going to say Kobe was better. And then you have the experts who are probably going to say by a pretty strong majority that Duncan was better. So where am I going with all this? So where I'm going with all this is that the better hypothesis, the better player hypothesis, is not contradicted by the Kobe Duncan example, even though on a card for card basis, Kobe typically will sell for 5, 6, 7, maybe even more times as much as Duncan. Like a Kobe PMG Green has a sale on the public record of $2 million. I think the highest Duncan ever got was around $250,000. So that's that. Now we're approaching a 10x multiplier on a particular card, and that's uniquely that card is even more meaningful to Duncan's catalog than it is to Kobe's, just because 97-98 was Duncan's rookie year also. But the point I want to make here is that that are we sure that the better player hypothesis predicts that Duncan would be more collectible and worth more than Kobe? Because I think the better player hypothesis predicts the opposite, because we can't take for granted that just because the experts would say that Duncan is better, that the majority of people go along with that. I don't think that's true. I think the majority of people believe that Kobe was better. And I think there's a sizable chunk of those people who think Kobe is one of the 2 or 3 best players of all time. I do think that the better player hypothesis can remain intact. I don't think that example disproves it. I think that example actually reinforces it. Because if we were to actually investigate which player is better among Kobe and Duncan, most people are going to say Kobe. And if most people are going to say Kobe, then the better player hypothesis predicts that Kobe will be more collectible and achieve higher market prices than Duncan, which he does. So that's the trick. That's the wrinkle in the better player hypothesis that still is being ironed out, which is, how do we decide who the better player was? And that's that. Now, the thing that's nice about sports is that unlike some other categories of intellectual thought, sports do not start from a place of arbitrariness. Sports have a clearly defined outcome, which is winning games and then ultimately winning championships. That is the clearly defined outcome. And then we have amazing tools, statistical tools, to measure how effective any given player is at doing that, even in a team context. So unlike lots of other areas of thought in sports, we actually have an obviously marked out goal and objective, and we have very effective ways of measuring which players have been the most effective at achieving that objective. So I do think that there will be a tendency over time, there will be a gravitation over time as these statistical methods become more and more entrenched, as the integration of these ideas with the presentation of the sports on the media, on the mainstream media level increases, that there's going to be more consensus building around what metrics indicate. With that said, that's not a surefire thing for several reasons. One being that as metrics continue to gain prominence in influencing discussions about who the best players are, the metrics get manipulated. And we saw a glaring example of that when during this past offseason, NBA's newly introduced net points metric was manipulated in the offseason to actually rewrite the history of the 2024-2025 season to change which players ranked where. And they did it quietly in the offseason. So that's something that I'm concerned about, is the manipulation of statistics after the fact, because statistics are gaining such a prominence in the dialogue and in the discourse that black box statistics, especially those controlled by media outlets who have agendas other than truth telling, that those numbers will be manipulated and that they will be used to tell stories as they continue to gain prominence. But anyway, I don't think we're ever going to solve the. I think we are tending towards more and more consensus around accepted metrics that measure the objective of sports, especially individual performance and team context. That's an important distinction that sometimes gets overlooked. That team accolades sometimes get blurred with individual accolades. But I don't know that we'll ever solve it. I don't know that we'll ever have a perfect or anything even close to a consensus. And that it's certainly at this point there's plenty of room for debate. And that in the Kobe and Duncan example in particular, I think most people think Kobe was a better player. And so I think that the better player hypothesis holds up under that example. That's going to do it for today's HOJ-Cast. Thank you guys for tuning in. See you next one.